There we go. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Love Rising podcast. My beautiful partner, Kylee, is on her honeymoon. I was just at her wedding last weekend. It was beautiful, and she was actually going to come and do the recording on her honeymoon, but she doesn't have good internet connection, which is totally fine, and we all can totally understand. But I have an awesome guest on with me today, Michelle Ohana, who also was having a little bit of internet connection. So she's out in the forest, which is perfect. We love that. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
I'm just going to give you guys a little background, a little short bio. So Michelle is a former Pixar animator with a passion for travel, story, community, and healing. She is an intuitive and has a gift for helping women become aware of and overcome deep wounds or stories that are holding them back in their lives and businesses. She helps them to create more ease in their lives through trusting themselves and getting in touch with their own intuitive guidance. She is currently living in California and planning an intimate transformational retreat. So she's planning a retreat. So I'm sure there's updates on that. She has been in the process of moving, so those dates aren't for sure yet. But check out her website, Michelle Ohana, just like it sounds, .com. And she also has a contact form on her website. So if you're intrigued and would like to work with her, get more info on that as we go through, be sure to check her out there. Okay, and we will link to that in the show notes, of course. So what is your story? How did you get here? We always like to start with that. And we were just saying right before we started the recording that I don't actually know Michelle's story. So yeah, I'm excited.
That's really funny because I actually started out as a story coach before I became more of like an all-around like intuitive healer coach person. But yeah, the way I started out was, I was an animator at Pixar, and I've always loved people. I've loved imitating people. And so I think that's why I got into animation, because it's kind of like acting. And then I just wasn't happy doing that. I wasn't happy being in front of a computer all day. And I had this calling to help people. And so I stopped doing animation to figure out what I wanted to do. And I gave this talk at UC Berkeley one day. They invited me to talk about my career. And during that talk, I spoke about my career in animation, but, that didn't really feel like authentic to me because I wasn't really doing that anymore. I wasn't in love with it anymore. And so I just started talking to the students about what was really going on. And I was like, you know what, I left animation. I don't even want to do that anymore. And I don't even know where I'm going, but I'm just following my heart. And so far I'm having fun, and I don't know where it's leading me to. And I just talked about everything I was going through. And I was scared to do that because I'm like, they're going to think I'm a loser. I'm not even employed right now. But what I did was open them up to sharing their own vulnerabilities. And they all started raising their hands and saying how inspired they were by my talk, because it gave them the ability to be vulnerable themselves and realize, like, maybe I don't want this career that I'm going for, or, made them question like what they really wanted in their lives and follow their hearts. And that was so meaningful for me, because that's when I discovered the power of storytelling and the power of inspiring others. And I realized that's what I want to do in my life. So I decided to be a coach, and I started as a story coach, and then it wasn't deep enough for me. And so I realized I have this gift of helping women overcome like deep wounds from their past that we all have, like stories that we tell ourselves that are affecting our whole lives. I can see what that is for people without even asking them. And so what I do with my clients is we go right into what that is and where it comes from, and we bring awareness to that situation so they can take action that's not in those patterns of fear anymore. And what happens is they build this confidence that they didn't even know they had. They become who they've always been inside, and their businesses grow, their lives flourish, and everything that they wanted actually starts coming to them a lot quicker because they're not acting out of fear anymore. So that's my story. That's what I do.
That is a great story, and it was awesome how like succinct it was as well. So you could tell that, that story coaching, that makes sense. Because sometimes they can, stories can be a little rambly. I know I definitely get super rambly when people ask me that question. So I need some coaching maybe.
I can't help you with that.
So we're kind of talking today about self-relationship, self-care, and relationships too, as well. We kind of decided to just go with the flow and see where the conversation goes. So what's kind of your take on, self-care as someone who's helping women find that intuitive voice and heal those wounds and move forward in a way that's not from those patterns of fear, like you said? Like, how does kind of self-care and this relationship with ourselves play into that?
Well, self-care is so important, and that is something that I'm like diligent about, because if you are not like taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, and spiritually, mentally, then you can't tap into your own inner guidance. You're not really like creating your own life. You're more reacting to your own life. And so I think living and creating anything for yourself has to be intentional. And in order for, to create the life that you want, I think you really have to spend time with yourself and tap into what it is, keep checking in with yourself. And the only way to do that is to like keep your body, your mind, and your spirit like feeling clear and connected and tuned in. So yeah, in order to, and sorry, there's bugs flying all around me. I'm in Yosemite National Park right now, for those of you who can't tell.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's so important to be tuned in and tapped in. I think the secret to happiness is to be tuned into who you really are and what you really want. So self-care is like the first step in that. And I make sure to, I have my rituals every morning, and I'm not like super strict about it, but most days, I wake up and I do my own self-care that I need, and I tune into what I need, and then it makes my day so much better, and I'm more productive, I'm more creative, and it makes my relationship with my husband better because I'm an all-around happy person.
Yes, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree with all of that. And there's something that you said around, you're not creating your own life when you don't know who you are, like when you haven't been tapping into yourself every day on a daily, or, maybe not daily, but on a consistent basis. So what would you say to those people who, I think there's always two things that come up for me around self-care. It's that self-care isn't always massages. And, I think that's like when people are kind of new to it. I have this client that I've been working with recently, and she's just kind of like, I've never taken care of myself. Like, I have no idea how to do that. It's like this totally new thing for her. And so she was kind of like making sugar scrubs. Like, what do I, like, it's like this funny, like, and sometimes we probably forget because we've been in this realm of coaching and we are committed to the self-care because we've seen the results from it. Like you're saying, I'm a happier person throughout the day. I can serve people better. But I think it's important to realize that self-care isn't always, it doesn't always feel that good, right? Like sometimes it's kind of like I have to stop myself from, like, I get really focused and obsessive on stuff. And so I'll sit at the computer for like 3 hours if I don't stop myself, right? And so it's almost like hard in a way to like put that down. That's self-care. Like it's almost like putting structure around myself. It's like I need to take a break every 90 minutes or else I'm not getting anywhere. I don't know. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like how self-care sometimes doesn't always look like we might think it looks?
Yeah, well, I think you spoke about like what works for you, right? Like taking a break. So I think that's the key also, is figuring out what self-care is for you, because it's different for everyone. And so I think first it's like identifying what your MO is, right? So if you're somebody who can't get away from the computer, then you need to create like a self-care regimen around that. Sorry, there's a bug like swarming me right now. Yeah, you need to create like self-care around that. And sometimes it is uncomfortable if it's something that you're not used to. For example, like I think the best thing people can do, or best thing I can do for myself, is meditate every day. For me, meditation is the biggest form of self-care because it quiets your mind and allows you to really like hear, your higher self, or whatever you want to call it, your intuitive guidance, or just to like get all that noise out and just realize like everything's okay. And sometimes for people just starting out meditating, it's really uncomfortable because they're not used to it. They're resisting quieting their mind, and so that doesn't always feel good. But I think once you get into a practice of self-care that feels that, that works for you, it actually starts to feel really good. And it's something that you don't want to live without, really, because you realize how much you've needed it once you've had it in your life as a practice. But I think the key is also to make it a practice, and that can be hard for people if you have kids, or you're really busy, and I don't know, like if you're working a 9 to 5 and starting a business on the side. I've worked with women like that, and they're like, how do you find the time? But it could just be like 10 or 15 minutes a day that can make all the difference. So sometimes it could, it's uncomfortable to do because you're changing up your routine, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the routine that totally saves you and creates more ease in your life. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, totally. It totally does. Make it a practice. Like we talk about this a lot, just like the consistency of it, and the prioritization of it. And that, time isn't always something, like we think of time as this thing that we're a victim of. Like, oh, there's never enough time. I don't have enough time for my job and my kids and my husband, and also time to make time for myself. But the truth is, if your kid walked in the door with a missing finger screaming, you would have time to go to the hospital, right? So it's really like, that's an extreme example, but it's like really like, what do we prioritize? Like we can make time for whatever we need to make time for. And so self-care is something that we can make time for. And that's the other piece of this, is that what's the value of it? Because I think a lot of people, especially women who they don't necessarily have a practice of self-care, they don't see the value of it, right? They're like, I think it would feel good, but that just kind of feels like selfish, or, do I really need it? So what's kind of like, what's your experience with that, and women like feeling like, let's talk about the value of it, like the value of self-care.
Well, first, I want to touch on what you just said, because that's really something a lot of women are experiencing. Is it's really the story of, I'm not worthy of that. Because a lot of women, especially mothers, are nurturers, and they're so used to putting everyone else before them, all these needs before their own. And I've worked with women who have a really hard time putting their needs first. But the value of putting your own needs first is actually that you are filling up your own well so that you can give to others. And you can't be a good nurturer if you're not filling yourself up with nurturing yourself, And also, it's like, what are you teaching those around you if you're not taking care of yourself? What are you teaching your children to not take care of themselves, right? And so the value, I think, of self-care is like, if you're a mother, that you're teaching your kids to take care of themselves, but also as a human being, if you want to give to others, if you want to be of value, then you have to take care of yourself, because otherwise you're going to be of use to nobody. And then on a personal level, it's just the older you get, the more responsibilities we seem to have, and the more we allow. When you're a child, you don't really allow fear to affect you, or society, but the older we get, you know, the more it starts to get to you. And you need to have ways to reconnect with your inner child and with love and with calming yourself, whatever that is. So when you do that for yourself, when you take just time, even if you have meditation day where you couldn't quiet your mind, just the act of taking the time for yourself is special, because you're like saying like, okay, I'm taking this time for myself, I'm taking care of myself. And it's like, it changes, it shifts the energy from, I always have to do all of this stuff for everyone else, I'm so busy, I have to do all of, you know, it changes it to like, I care about myself, I'm putting myself first. And then that opens this door to all of these opportunities and creative ideas and solutions to your problems, if you just give it time, if you just like allow it to come through. Does that make sense? I guess like it won't come through. Like your intuitive guidance won't come through if you're not clearing a channel for it to come through. And that's what I like, you know, that's why I'm all about ease and flow. It doesn't mean not working. It means realizing that having joy in your life and putting that first is what's going to bring those ideas to you, those solutions that you need. And that creates more time for you as well.
Yes, this is a super good topic here, because I think it's something that I've actually been working on personally, and it was through the guidance of my mentor, who talked a lot about I didn't have space in my life. It was like everything is scheduled, and like I also want to give this credit, because it does work for me. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a business. I get a lot done every week, every day. I'm very, you know, driven and passionate and all those things, and it's awesome. And for me, scheduling things is like a really huge part of that. You know, it's like really important. I have time blocks and I do this. But my mentor was kind of mentioning, I was talking about how it's hard to kind of experience pleasure, right? And that's a huge part of self-care, is like being able to experience pleasure on some level. And so she was talking about how pleasure requires space. And if I don't allow any space in my day, how could I ever have this? She called it a super highway to pleasure, right? It's like we have to consistently get on that highway and create that space and create, I think you said, that channel of, you know, of the ability to kind of like tap into that pleasure, tap into that beingness, or else it's kind of like bushwhacking, right? It's like I haven't created the highway. I'm like, how do I kind of like turn around in the forest? Like, where was that pleasure again? How do I relax again, right? And I have to like machete my way through and maybe like hike up a steep path or something. And and so she was talking about like there has to be space in your day for the, like you said, the intuition to come up, for the pleasure to be experienced, for that voice of ourselves, of our true selves, to really come through. There has to be like space in our day.
Yeah, definitely. And you can schedule that in, you know, like you can, like I had my first business coach that I ever had, you know, I was working a 9-to-5 still and trying to start a business on the side. And, you know, she was telling us to schedule everything in our day. And what I liked about that was I scheduled in my gym time. I scheduled in time with my husband. And while that isn't natural for me, and that was kind of uncomfortable because I am not one that likes to stick to schedules like that, it really worked for me at the time, because I was somebody who, you know, I had 2 jobs pretty much. And I put in the things that were super important to me, and that was spending time with my husband and exercising and meditating. I even put meditating in there. And so you can if you're a scheduler, like just make sure you schedule in like pleasure time, whatever that is. You know, you don't even have to be specific about what it is, but making space can still be on your schedule.
Yeah,
which
I
I
love
think
that.
really
Mhm.
works. Yeah.
I have that. I have like a big chunk of time in the morning that's on my schedule every day. That's like my, my meditation and journaling and reading and stuff. Um, and another thing that this mentor actually told me to do is she was like, get to anything you're going to 10 minutes early. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to yoga, if you're going to a doctor's appointment, if you're waiting for an oil change or going to an oil change or something, go 10 minutes early. And then you're forced to have like this time where you're kind of like waiting, because I'm one of those
Mm.
people who's like chronically like 5 minutes late. And it's partly because I'm just packing it in, right? And like, I'm going to do this
Mm-hmm.
and this and this all in this small amount of time. So
Mm-hmm.
that worked really well for me too, is like just getting to places a little bit early and having a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
time where it's like, don't get on your phone, just sit there, just sit there.
Yeah. Yes. How did that feel?
Oh, it was so hard. I was like, you're crazy. 10 minutes early. There's so much I can do. But since then it's like, oh, I get it. Like, I totally get why that it just, it creates that space, right? There's space then in your life
Mm-hmm.
to like, maybe you're early to yoga and you make a new friend,
Mm-hmm.
maybe,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no space for that kind of spontaneity when you have everything so scheduled, um,
Mm-hmm.
but I also love putting those self-care things in your schedule, especially if you have a very packed schedule.
Yeah. It's really whatever works for you. I've tried it all.
Yeah.
And I realized like sometimes it's your environment, you know?
Hmm.
That's why I moved. I was living in Berlin and I've always been a city girl. And as I've gotten older, I've noticed like how much more I need nature. And I used to live in Oakland. I lived in San Francisco, and then I lived in Oakland, and there were always like places to go with redwood trees. And I
Hmm.
found myself escaping to those places a lot. Whenever I would be in those places, I would be clear, and I would get all these inspirational ideas and ideas for my business, ideas to, whatever I wanted to do. It was like my happy place.
Hmm.
And I realized when I moved to Berlin, I didn't have that, and I needed it. I needed a place to be where I could be really connected. And so, some people, I find that like they're just in the wrong environment. And sometimes you just need a place to go to clear your mind, especially if you have a busy, hectic schedule. So like finding that place for you is also like a form of self-care, I think.
Mm. Yeah. I do that with most of my clients, is to have them create a sacred space. And that could be like
Mm-hmm.
in their closet, like, it's a
Mm-hmm.
space where maybe they have some beautiful like trinkets, or I mean, I have my altar behind me over here, but like, or it could even be like your car. Like, it's your car at a certain
Mm-hmm.
time of day. Like, you drive away from your house and you park it by a park, but having that space that's associated in your mind with you and quiet and space can be so, it like kind of takes you out of a vibration that you may have been stuck in, right? Like, you can be
Mm-hmm.
stuck in like this kind of spiral of thought or whatever, or there's people all around and it's loud, and moving yourself out of that environment to a different environment, and then having that environment be like consistent, can be really powerful. um,
Yeah, I
mhm.
totally agree. And that's what ritual is for me as well. Like I'm really big on ritual, which is like, what are your morning rituals? What are your evening rituals? What is it that, you start your day with and you end your day with? It's something that like is sacred to you, just like a sacred space, right? Like, so for me, it's like I wake up in the morning and I meditate, and then I love my oracle cards.
Mhm.
I'll pick an oracle card, and I love journaling. That's how I started channeling. I actually
Mhm.
channel messages.
Mhm.
Um, and that makes me, and it takes a while. So I created a life where I can like have, a couple hours to do all of this.
Mhm.
And then I don't even take clients until like noon, so that I have time to do my whole, and I exercise whatever I need to do in the morning. It's just my ritual of like me time,
Mhm.
and it's that is so important, because ultimately, like, let's just talk about what self-care is. It's self-love, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're after. It's loving yourself enough to put yourself first and to do these things for yourself. That's really what it is.
Oh, totally, totally. It totally is. Self-care, self-compassion. I think those are not watered down, but different ways to say self-love. I think sometimes self-love can sound like people are like, whoa, I can't do that. Like they're that far removed from it. But people can normally, they can say, okay, I can do self-care, or okay, I can do self-compassion. I can, be a little nicer to myself. So they're like kind of like starting points, and self-love is like the end goal, I guess.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to love themselves? Just asking you.
Yeah. I mean, that is, I think it's a combination of learned societal, pressures, basic. Like, I think especially in women, I mean, this is the field and that I work in is self-love. My program is called Self-Love Mastery. Like, this is what I do all day, every day. And in my opinion, from the framework that I come from, it's from, you could say, a patriarchal societal system. So women have equated their worth through productivity, but also the shape of their bodies, their looks, a lot of external validation and not internal validation. So
yes,
I think self-love is the default, luckily. So it's like a remembering instead of instead of getting, instead of learning something new, it's actually like putting back the pieces back together.
Yes, and now is the time for that. It's happening on high speed now. Women are remembering and we're rising up. And that's actually like the messages I was getting when I was channeling, which is why I shifted my business to helping women like rise out of all of these fears. Because I was like told I'm here to help women rise, which is probably your calling as well. And it's like we're waking up. We're like, wait a minute, we're really powerful. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And it's just like removing all of these layers of like bullshit stories. You said I could cuss, right?
Oh yeah.
It's just removing all these layers of bullshit stories that we've been telling ourselves that we learned. And, some people argue that it's even ancestral, like we're remembering being witches and being told we can't speak our truth or we'll be burned at the stake, and whatever you want to believe, like we all have this like fear of stepping into a powerful role. Like most of us are like have that. And there's so much fear there. And if we just like look underneath that fear, the core of who we are, then yeah, self-love is there and power is there and compassion is there. And that's where your full purpose is. So I think that's really cool what you're doing because you're helping women get to that place.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I love meeting another like woman who does that.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And it's like, we talk about like, do what lights you up, or like, connect to that part of you that lights you up. And whenever I think about that, that women, and even myself sometimes still feel that like kind of crushing like shame around speaking your truth, or what I want just in general. Like more and more it's less about my body, because that's where it kind of started, but more and more it's more about like my desires, what I want in this world, how I want to show up, what I want, the kind of things I want to affect. Like it's crazy these learned exactly expectations around what we should want, right? Or how we should want to go forward. And so I love also helping other women to do that, to go for what they want, to think that, to believe that they deserve it. Like, why not? So
yeah. And I'm a true believer in anything that you desire, anything you have a desire for is really truly part of you, is something that you're supposed to do, or it's leading you somewhere. you know, and it's like, listen to that. And there's so many people that are like, I want this, but I'm not that kind of person. Like,
Yep.
I want to lead retreats, but I'm not a leader. Or I want to be, you know, I want to write a book, but I'm not a writer. Like, everyone has all these stories, but it's like, where do you think that desire comes from? Desire comes from like your higher self, from your intuition, like pushing you. And it's just, I know we're getting off topic of self-care,
No, this is great. This is self-care,
but
knowing what you want.
yeah,
Knowing what you want.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But the thing is, like, it's just, your desires are just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and pushing you more and more until you listen. Or like, the sad thing is, like, some people stuff them down for so long that they just kind of get depressed, you know? And so it's just because they're just like suppressing themselves. Basically, when you suppress your desire, you're suppressing your inner self. And that's really sad, because then it's like so much more difficult to like lift yourself out of that, even though it's possible. So yeah, it's like, your desires are there for a reason. I love to tell people that, because a lot of people don't realize that. And you're right, it does start with, it can start with like just wanting to have a body that feels good to you, and eating well. And actually, that's what happened for me. It started with nutrition a long time ago. I got really into nutrition because I was like, wow, I have anxiety. So I went to an acupuncturist, and she's like, are you drinking coffee every day? And I said, yeah. She said, it causes anxiety. I'm like, interesting. So I started like being like, what else causes anxiety? And I totally changed my whole diet, got so healthy. I'm like, I feel amazing. You know, I'm like, what else can I do to feel this good? And it starts with something. It starts with like, you know, a problem that you have, and then that kind of can lead you on this path of self-discovery and self-care and finding all of these tools that work for you. And then, you know, it's just like, it becomes this, I think self-care ultimately becomes like a spiritual growth that goes along with it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's so funny that you brought up nutrition, because I think if Kylee was here, and me too, like, we both definitely started in that kind of physical, like, it's like taking care of your physical body, right? I mean, my framework on what I work with clients on is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. If you're nourishing all four bodies, then you will be happy and healthy. And so it seems like a lot of people start on that physical plane, right? They start like, oh, I could eat some more, greens, and I could, do some like exercise that feels good. And obviously there's a lot of like imbalance that goes into that. And we talk a lot about that as well, like disordered eating and disordered exercising and all of that stuff. But if it comes from this place of like real self-care, that stuff is definitely just going to lead you into, okay, how can I get my thoughts kind of more healthy? How can I take care of my mental body? How can I take care of my emotions? And then of course, the spiritual piece just starts to come, because I think we kind of start to remember. Beautiful. Yeah, I think we kind of start to remember, oh, there's this purpose, yeah. So, I like that. I like that idea of spirit, like kind of the spirit, it kind of all comes together into the spiritual purpose. So talk more about that in your experience.
In my experience.
I feel like you have, you're a Reiki practitioner, and you have this kind of intuition, you channel. So.
Yeah, that's so funny. So, I had my, like, what the dark night of the soul is. I mean, I guess I didn't know what that was at the time. But I had that when I was 29. I'm 38 now. And I went through a really rough breakup, and I questioned who I am and what I was doing, and all of my all of my actions and where they were coming from. And it just, you question everything about your life. And it was really tough to go through, but and I was having anxiety. And so I started with nutrition. So I went to an acupuncturist, and I started getting really healthy and feeling a lot happier. But then I wanted to dive deeper, and I went to this like weekend course. It's called Landmark. I had all these friends doing it. I don't know if you've heard of it, but I had
I've
all
heard
these
of it.
friends
I
doing
haven't
it.
done it. Hmm.
Well, this was a long time ago. I think it's a lot more expensive now. It was like 10 years ago, but I had all these friends like telling me about it, and I was like, I don't need that. And then when I was finally at my lowest, I was like, fine, I'll try anything. And it was great because it introduced me to the idea of how your childhood stories, like decisions you make when you're a child, like can affect your entire life and all the decisions you make now as an adult. And they're like, it's like your subconscious mind is running the show. And it kind of introduced me to that. And then I was interested in psychics. And so I just sort of started following my, what excites me, following like what intrigues me. And that has always been like, you know, like psychics and like tarot readings. And I was kind of embarrassed to tell people about it because a lot of people are like, that's so woo woo, and like crystals. But I was just into that stuff, into like witchy things. And so I just went with it. And I realized now, and then I had this psychic tell me, you know, you have this ability as well. And I was like, no, I don't. And he's like, no, actually you do. Like, I'm like, well, what do I need to do? And he said, just meditate every day. And so I was like, well, I don't even know how to meditate. And he told me to buy this book, Ask and It Is Given by Esther and Jerry Hicks. And
Yeah, I'm
I had
reading
never
that
heard of
right
it.
now.
Yeah. And
That's
I had
so
never
funny.
heard of it. Like, this was 10 years ago, right? And I was like, oh my God, it became like my new Bible, right? Like, I was just, because it has exercises in the back. And it really started transforming the way I think about life and how the universe works. And, you know, it was just my journey. I just started trying to learn everything. I was meditating every day. And then one day, I don't tell many people this, but one day when I was meditating, something happened to me that was kind of similar to what happened to Esther Hicks in the book when she started channeling Abraham, except it happened with my hand. Like, I felt like something wanted to control my hand, and it started writing letters on my leg. It freaked me out. I wasn't ready for it, so I stopped meditating for a while. I was like, I'm not ready for this. So yeah, I stopped. And then, you know, I kept seeing psychics sometimes whenever I felt like I needed guidance. And then I just started meditating again. I picked up the Esther and Jerry Hicks book again eventually when I was like going through a rough time in my life. And I started doing yoga. And then it wasn't until I moved to Berlin and I was starting my own business. Sorry if this is a long-winded story. I'm trying to remember the chronological events. But it wasn't, I was in a really low place when I moved to Berlin because I took an animation job that it was a great company, but I didn't really want to be an animator anymore. I just took the job because they moved me to Berlin and I wasn't really sure what else to do. And I wasn't happy doing that. And so I started meditating every day. I started journaling every day. And that's when like my self-care like super kicked into all the tools that I have learned over the years. And that is when I noticed that, and I had already learned Reiki by this point, but that's when I noticed that I see words in my head. And I was like, what is this? I'm like, well, I've always seen words in my head, like, you know, like in my mind's eye, like people are talking, I just see the words written out, but I never thought anything of it. And then one day after meditation, I started journaling. I'm like, well, I see these words, so I'm just going to write them down one at a time. And I just started writing down one word at a time that showed up for me. And it turned out to be like messages. And it wasn't my words. These are words I don't even use. A lot of it was poetry, and it was really beautiful. And I realized that the reason I had this desire, I think, to tap into, like, to speak to psychics and to like learn about tarot and all of this mystical, you know, esoteric stuff is because I had this ability and I was ready to tap into it now. And so I think, you know, your desires are actually a clue, or what you're interested in is actually a clue into what your soul's purpose is. And so I was ready at this point to explore it. And I started using this guidance with my clients. I would tune into their energy before our call, and every single time my guidance is correct. And I don't even understand it sometimes. Like I'll get words like shamanic healing. I'm like, this girl doesn't seem like she's into shamanic healing. And then she tells me she's like learning all about plant medicines. And I'm like, whoa, okay. I hadn't pegged you for that, but that's what my guidance told me, things like that. And so the more I started doing it, the more I started trusting myself. And then the more you trust yourself, the more it comes through. And then, yeah, that's kind of been my journey. So it started with nutrition, right? Trying to cause anxiety. And then it moved into something more emotional and mental, like the stories that are holding you back and understanding that on a logical level. And then it moved into the spiritual, realizing like who I am. Like you said, it became a remembering that I had to be ready for it. I had to follow the steps that I was kind of being guided to take. Because it's hard to make that jump from nothing at all, like no spiritual practice, to like, oh my God, I'm a psychic, or like I'm, like channeling my guides. It's a huge jump. So I think it's important to follow your own path, to discovering what that is. And it's really fun. And then it becomes so special, because I'm getting goosebumps talking about it, because you realize at the end of the day that you're never alone. That you're always guided. You're always part of everything. Everyone is part of everyone and everything. And when you really come home to realizing that, then that's when the fear really starts to dissolve, and it's a lot easier to love yourself, because you're loving
Oh,
everybody.
yeah. No, that was so beautiful. That was such a beautiful wrap up, and it's true. I
Thanks.
mean, I totally relate. Like I totally relate to that feeling of, I mean, the fear still comes up, but I was thinking about it the other day. I was like hearing a voice that was fear of some sort, and
Mm-hmm.
it was like I was just kind of like, it was just there, but it's like,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't need to listen to that. Like I'm doing this other thing.
Yeah.
And so it was like, that happens more and more often. And it's not, I always like to tell that to people. It's like, it's not like there's some sort of destination where like fear's gone and you feel like you're in bliss all the time and you're just like enlightened or something. But it just like, it becomes less important. Like
Mm-hmm.
all that, all that dichotomy, all that separateness, like the
Mm-hmm.
separateness and thinking, that's like black and white and good and bad and fear and love. And it just all kind of like becomes less important. Um,
Yeah.
and that's the best way that I can kind of explain it. But there's a few like other things I just wanted to pull out a little bit. And
Yeah.
so this is something I see. I'll when I coach clients is
Mm-hmm.
they don't necessarily engage in the process of self-care. So I think what, like you telling that story and like kind of that chronological process, it's very obvious that like you were engaging, actually like being present and engaging with these practices, like doing the meditation, not to just check it off your list, but like actually engaging with the process. And then that process, like that consistent engagement with the process,
Mm-hmm.
it was like a blossoming, like I think that's the best way to explain it. It's like you don't force it, right? Because I tend to do this. I'm that typical like type A, like get it done kind of thing. So I'll make lists and I'll check it off, and it, all that. And so I can find myself sometimes getting into that space where my self-care becomes another like checklist. And that's forcing it, right? That's forcing whatever the process is. And the
Mm-hmm.
process, it's a natural process. It's, the Tao is the other way that they talk about it. It's like that perfect place of non-effort, of perfect balance.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so just for people out there who might, be like, I want to feel that way. I want to feel like the fear is gone, or the fear doesn't matter. And I've been doing all the practices. I've tried meditation. I've tried this and this and this. And
Mm-hmm.
just to like reassure them that it is a process, and that the consistent engagement with the process allows the
Mm-hmm.
flower to open, it allows the
Mm-hmm.
process. Yeah.
That is such a great question, or a great topic, because that is like something that's when clients come to me. Because so it's great to start a practice, meditation and self-care. But what happens is, and by the way, fear is never gone. I mean, maybe for like Buddha or whoever's been enlightened for a few, and that is a goal, right? But never judge yourself for having fear. Anyone who's listening to this, it's not that like fear will always be gone. It's that when it shows up, you can recognize it and be like, and not let it control you. That's really the goal. And so what I was going to say with meditation and self-care, and what happens is that creates space for you to allow whatever needs to come through, and sometimes that's really uncomfortable, because spiritual growth is not easy. It's not all like flowers and like festivals and like meditation. It's like hard. It's confronting all of your deepest wounds, and you have to, the only way out of that is through, and it's really like becoming aware of what those are and how they're running the show. And that's the next level. So you can get, so what happens is, what I see is like people get to a point where they're feeling really good, and then they're like, okay, well now I'm ready to take on my desires, start a business, or start this new thing, that I move to this new place. And that is when these fears try to really show up for you. That's when they get loud, because what they are is your ego. And your ego subconscious mind is just trying to keep you safe. And it's trying to keep you safe based on what you learned when you were a child. So it doesn't really make sense the way it's trying to keep you safe now. All of these fears don't make sense for you now, but like that's what's happening. And so they start showing up like and getting louder and louder the more you're trying to up level your life. And that's when you can't judge them. It's just, that's when like you get a mentor to help you, like me, or like read some books or go to a seminar or something. That's when you really have to start looking within and trying to decipher where that's coming from, and really looking at your shadow side or your wounds or whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing, but your stories, where they're coming from, and becoming aware of those and how they're running the show and how they're affecting every area of your life. And with that awareness, you can choose to not act out of that fear anymore, like you were saying. That's when the fear shows up and you realize it's just an illusion. And you're like, oh, okay, I see you, fear. I see you. I see that you're coming from like when mom and dad were fighting when I was 3 years old, but I realized that I don't need that right now. I'm just actually going to go do this thing that you were trying to make me afraid of. Like, you can actually talk to your fear. So I think that's like the next level. And then from there, that's like the real spiritual growth that happens. Then you can up level, and then it keeps coming back. So if you're experiencing fear, I still experience fear all the time. It doesn't affect me like it used to. It's not like debilitating, because now I know how to deal with it. But you start to develop more practices that aren't just like meditation, but more, like you said, like awareness and ways of talking to yourself, and like creating ways to like calm the fear down, if that makes sense. And just be like, oh, okay, like just recognizing it is the first step, and then taking an action against it like kind of makes it smaller and smaller. I hope that answered.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then one thing that always comes up for me, for my clients, they ask when, we kind of talk about that, is how do I know what's fear and what is, that, I guess, that kind of uncomfortable spiritual growth, right? Like, what's the things I need to like push through, and what are the things that it's like, nope, that's out of alignment, move on.
That's the question, isn't it? That's the question that I always grappled with. And it's so funny you said that, because today I was like, I should write a book about that subject. Exactly. Just because it feels like if I was writing a thesis, that's what it would be about.
Right? Yes, totally.
yes, learning to, I was thinking about that. I was like, I wonder if we're going to talk about that today, actually. So it's so serendipitous. But yeah, thinking about how do you know it's fear, and how do you know it's your intuition telling you not to do something? And that's something that I was grappling with for a while. And for me, the way that I figured it out was to actually dive deep into what my fears are and where they were coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And once they were all like, once I like went layer after layer and uncovered all of this, guilt and shame that I had from childhood, or, we all have something. We all have many layers of guilt or shame, or like stories, right? That are running, the subconscious stories that are running the show. Mm-hmm. Once I like really uncovered what all of those were, then it was easier for me to decipher whether something was intuition or fear. Because if you look at it and you realize like, oh, okay, well, this is happening because of this fear that I always have. And if you know that, and then the action that you're supposed to take still doesn't feel very good, and you keep taking that action and you're still like, it's still not feeling aligned, then I realize, okay, well, it's out of alignment, if that makes sense. So mm-hmm. First I look at it as like, okay, is this fear? And I think it's really just practice. Yeah. But first you have to discover what those fears are. And once you're aware of them, you can look at them and be like, okay, is this fear? And then then you can use your logical mind, be like, is this fear, or is this out of alignment? Because it's really hard to tell. And everyone's always trying to tell you to like, it's not in alignment, it doesn't feel good. But right. I don't necessarily always agree with that, because fear makes it not feel good. And sometimes you do need to like act on certain things that are kind of uncomfortable. Yeah. So, yeah. And so it's really just like doing the shadow work, or the wound work, the like figuring out like what are these issues and where are they coming from. And, once you become aware of that, I think it's easier to like sort of navigate between like fear and intuition. Yeah. That's my answer right now.
Yeah. And I'm sure we could have a whole podcast on that, but
yeah,
there could probably be like a whole actual separate podcast with a different name, just talking about these kinds of things. But, mm-hmm. But yeah, I feel like that's where kind of the rubber meets the road. It's like where some of that mm-hmm. spiritual woo-woo stuff is like, yeah, it's got to feel good. It's got to be easy. Let it be pleasurable, all that stuff. But also like, you got to do the trial and error and learn mm-hmm. yourself. And mm-hmm. that's where I think a lot of people stop, because mm-hmm. that's the uncomfortable, like getting it wrong. You have to kind of get it wrong to get it right. Like you kind of have to know, you have to go through these periods of like trial and error and practice to actually really get to know that feeling. And then for me, like just kind of the more simple answer of what I say sometimes is like, if it feels like expansion, but there's like apprehension, or like almost, you could use the word fear too, but it's like this expansive fear. It's like, ooh, I'm scared to do that, but if I do it, man, it's going to feel so good at the end, or maybe not even that direct, but there's like this feeling of kind of like growth or expansion. It's like, okay, that's the uncomfortable kind of like push through fear. Whereas if it's like this contracted, like I'm getting smaller kind of fear, and I'm trying to describe a feeling, so it's kind of hard, but then that's the kind of fear that it's like contractive fear, right? That's just mm-hmm. like, but to know what that feels like, you have to do the journaling and do the meditation and work with the coaches and, do mm-hmm. that kind of process. The process.
Yeah. Like uncover layers of yourself pretty much. And I totally agree with that your body always knows the answer to, a question. And like, if it feels expansive, like do it, even though you're scared. If it feels contracting, like, yeah, I totally agree with that. And then on a deeper level, I think that like fear is actually a lot trickier than we realize sometimes. And so, right. Like I'll give you an example. For me, when I started my business, I had like no confidence at all. And I don't know why. I'm really good at what I do, but I didn't. And I had a coach uncover this for me. She was like, you just don't trust yourself. And she helped me like in this, like go deep into where this came from. And it was something I never would have seen for myself, because you can't see these things for yourself,
No.
Like it's just helpful to have a mentor see it for you. And she, it was like from, like my parents fighting when I was a kid, like I had these, I think I was like really upset with my dad, and then he got upset with me for being upset, something like that. Like, I won't go into the details, but at that moment I decided it wasn't okay to trust my own feelings. And the way that this started showing up in my life was like, I didn't trust myself, my feelings about anything. I became really indecisive. And then I, in my business, I wasn't trusting myself. I wasn't trusting my intuitive guidance. I didn't trust that I knew what to do with anything. I felt like I needed a mentor to tell me what to do all the time. And so like, like when we're talking about fear, like I didn't even see this as a fear that was showing up, like this is like a much deeper thing. It wasn't like, oh, I'm too afraid to. I didn't even think I was too afraid to tap into my guidance or to help people. I didn't think I was afraid. I just thought I didn't know. I thought I didn't know what to do, but really it was just fear, like telling me that I didn't know, so that like I wouldn't have that feeling of being wrong, because being wrong reminded me, having feelings that were wrong reminded me of when my father told me my feelings were wrong, right? So like that's how tricky I think fear can be. Like you won't even realize it's fear. It's just you're not like taking an action that you really do have the power to take.
Yeah.
So
Oh man,
it goes
I
so
think,
deep.
yeah, and you do. I mean, and you do have to go deep, and you have to be willing to go deep, like
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to get to those places and those kind of like those wounds that maybe creating all these actions on top, there's like a tree of, there's like the wound is like the root, and like then there's this tree of leaves and all of these other actions that come from that one root thing. And yeah, and that, man, self-trust, that's another thing that I want to have a podcast on is trusting yourself, because that is something. Self-doubt, I have this Facebook group, and self-doubt just keeps coming up as one of these things that a lot of women are struggling with, and trusting ourselves. And I think a lot of it, exactly what you said, not trusting our emotions, because in our society, women, it's like, oh, they're so emotional, they can't be trusted, they're who knows what they'll say one day, they'll say something different another day, and they're so indecisive, these kinds of like things. And so so we get a lot of people telling us, yeah, like don't trust your emotions, right? Or your feelings.
And like we're made to feel like if we're emotional we can't be leaders, or that we can't make good decisions because, oh, she's PMSing, like she's like off her rocker right now, and but not just that, it's like deeper. It's like a decision you made when you're a child, so it's different for everyone. It could be I've worked with women who were bullied as children, and they learned that just being who they are was not okay, because they were bullied just for being who they are. And that shows up in like being afraid to be who they are in their business, or being afraid to say what they really want to say. And so the self-doubt is how a lot of people identify what they're feeling, but it really is like coming from like a different root for everyone. And once like they discover where it's coming from, this is so cool. This is why I love what I do. Once they discover that, like they have epiphanies like every day about all the other ways this one root is showing up for them in their relationships, like in their businesses, in their lives, in the way they take care of themselves. And so just like creating that awareness like totally is what creates the shift. So the women like that in your group that are experiencing self-doubt, I would invite them to go deeper into where it comes from, into where when they first felt that in their lives.
Yeah.
Or tell them to call me.
Yeah, totally. I'm just writing
Cool.
that down. Awesome. So we are running out of time. I could talk about this stuff forever. But we
Me
always,
too.
I know, but we always like to ask if there's one piece of practical advice, short and sweet, they could do it today that has to do with self-care, or even this last thing that we were just talking about, what would that be?
Ooh. I think it's listen to yourself, meditate. I think meditating, whatever that is for you, whether it's running in the woods, whether it's like washing the dishes, being in the shower, whatever calms your mind from the hamster wheel that's in your head. Just really like listen to yourself, like let yourself be still and listen to what you really want. And if you're afraid to go through with whatever comes through, then get a mentor, get some guidance, get some accountability, because if you don't listen to that, it's never going to go away. It's just going to get louder. And if you still don't listen, it'll show up in really awful ways. That's where disease comes from, and depression. So I just really want everyone, like my passion is for everyone to just really follow through with their desires and listen to themselves and become like the true powerful woman you are underneath. And if there are any men listening, like it goes for them too, but
yeah, probably
like, yeah.
maybe dad. Hey dad.
Hi dad.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, that's my advice, is just like create some space to listen to yourself. Like for me, that's like the most important thing in self-care, is it's really getting in tune with who you are.
I love that. Yeah. And just to tack on a little bit on that is like, just if you're in that space where you're like, the wheels are turning and the hamster wheel is going and you're like, but I have so much to do. I have to do all this stuff. And they're telling me to go have self-care. What's this about? Like, stop. That's the best thing, right? Is like, just stop. Like, just stop. Stop. Go take a nap, like, because you're not going to get there from where you're at. Right. So if you're in that feeling of overwhelm, you're not going to get to a place of peace, from there. So it's okay to stop whatever you're doing, come back to it later.
Yeah, nothing you create, like everything you create out of overwhelm is not going to work. I've learned that the hard way.
Me too.
Even like marketing, if you write a marketing piece when you're like stressed out, people are going to feel that. It carries that energy. So it's always best to just like leave it. Because sometimes when you just like leave it and then you come back later, you can write one marketing post and get like tons of responses. That can be better than like writing like a lot of, I'm just talking business here, but like that can be better than writing like a ton of marketing posts when you're stressed out, and then they probably all won't work. But that goes for like everything. Like just put it down and like go exercise, or for even just 5 minutes, and just get yourself back into that state of knowing that everything's okay, and just like listening to yourself. Yeah, this was really fun.
Yeah, so much fun. Thank you so much.